The rise of fake news, providing alternative facts, the spread of wrong information that threatens our democracy. We are breaking fake news. This is On the Record.
In the age of digital media, anyone can be a storyteller, but that also means anyone can be a peddler of fake news. This has caused alarm for politicians, journalists, even the CBCP, as well as ordinary citizens. They called people to action to defend our democracy. But what exactly is fake news? Why does it matter, and what can we do about it? So we put together a very interesting panel to have a conversation about this controversial topic, and I think this is definitely not an echo chamber because we put together a lot of different perspectives on the table. So joining me on my left is Jonathan Ong. He is a professor of media studies at the University of Leicester, and he's currently in the Philippines conducting research on digital labor in the Philippines. Also joining us is Ruth Cabal, senior correspondent of CNN Philippines. We also have Mark Saludes. He is the vice chair of the Photojournalist Center of the Philippines. And finally, joining us is Ana Marie Banag, Presidential Communications Assistant Secretary. So thank you all for joining us. Okay, we should probably start the conversation with something so basic, but to me most confusing. What is fake news? Let's start with Jonathan.
Yeah, well, a simple definition of fake news is that it is a form of misinformation and deception. So it takes the form of online news stories where it's emotionally manipulative rather than being very fair and factual. And so they spread in social media precisely because they're very emotionally manipulative. So they would trigger people into anger or hate. And because of the fact that in online spaces, we're in filter bubbles or small like-minded communities, we would tend to share this information to people who would agree with us. And so sometimes it's quite confusing what fake news is. So in the past year, we saw websites that would impersonate established news brands. So Time.com and TheGuardian.com would have impersonators. But if you check the URL, there would be a number or a dash, an obvious misspelling. And so one thing that we also have to emphasize is that fake news follows a long tradition of political deception. So there's people behind the production.
Right. I think what's interesting here is when you say it's fake news, the analog or the corollary is there's something real, that there's real news. So maybe I should ask Ruth about this. One of the critiques against mainstream media in social media these days is bayaran, biased, and there's an accusation that even established news organizations also peddle fake news. So as a journalist for 15 years, how do you react to this?
Parang for me as a practicing journalist, when you say fake news, it goes against the basic idea of what news is, that it's based on facts, it's about accuracy and truthfulness. So parang kung ano yung fake news, yun yung kabaliktaran kung ano talaga yung dapat na maging news. And like what he mentioned na yung idea of deception, parang it's always geared towards something. You want an agenda more than just informing the public or more than just storytelling of what the things that you actually see.
But how do we know that what goes out in the news is real news? I mean, one of the criticisms, again, we hear is, how do we know you're not lying to us, mainstream journalists, right? So how do you feel about that?
We go through a rigid process of yung vetting the news, or before we print them out or before we air them, talagang we make sure that we get it from the actual sources. We get them from government officials, we get them from experts, we don't just get them from yung unreliable social media sites. And we also make sure that we get all sides of the story.
Right, and if someone makes a mistake, are there corresponding penalties for, let's say, journalists that didn't follow the ethics?
Yes,
So there's
yung news organizations always have yung mga ethics and parang code of standards for doing news stories.
What about, Mark, for photographers? I mean, one of the things that we always see is some photos can also be biased, right? That's one of the critiques against photographers. Let's say the controversial pictures on the war on drugs or the pictures with the war. You're already framing an issue in a particular way, and some are accusing our journalists of also photojournalists of being biased.
Larawan, bago siya nagiging news, marami siyang dinadaanan eh. So, depende kung ikaw ay staff photographer ng isang publication or isang news house or freelance ka, bago ka pumunta doon sa lugar kung saan mo kukunin yung larawan, most probably na pitch mo na yan, o assignment yan. So yung process of verification, kung totoo ba yung kukunin mong larawan o yung magiging larawan, nagsisimula bago pa man lang pumunta doon sa event or sa venue. So, paano siya nagiging bias? Actually, lahat naman ng mata or yung focus ng lente ng kahit sinong photographer, lente yon o mata yon ng mismong photographer. Kaya nga, yung photojournalism also needs yung word na journalism because you have to explain the image. Dahil pag hindi mo pinaliwanag yung laman ng imahe, subjective yung pagtingin ng kahit sinong reader or viewer. Kaya nga mas kampante tayo na totoo yung mga balitang lumalabas from the traditional media.
Okay.
And then we urge the public na mas dun mag-rely. Kasi merong proseso.
Pero since subjective na ang photograph, kaya rin siya madaling i-grab para gamitin ng fake news websites, di ba? So
Yeah,
we can
exactly.
talk about that later kung paano yan masusolusyonan. Of course, we have to hear from government about this because governments have been accused, not only in the Philippines, but all around the world, of peddling their own fake news. So from the Communications Office, how do you react to these accusations?
Well, first of all, you know, news, whatever that is that's coming from the government, and any pronouncement from government servants or government workers would always be news or media, and we acknowledge that. That's why sa opisina po namin, we are open kung alimbawa maglalabas ng regulation or legislative regulation kung paano nila gagawin na i-counter ang fake news, and also balansehin din yun with safeguarding the freedom of speech and expression. And with that also, we acknowledge na sa atin po, not only in the Philippines but worldwide, this is the price that we have to pay for the civil liberties of freedom of communication. Because hindi naman pwedeng dahil nasa gobyerno ka, dapat lahat ng sasabihin mo at all times, compose yung utak mo para sabihin ito. But of course, we acknowledge, like I said, we acknowledge na there's government must do something. It should not end up with legislating on something. It should not end up with coming up with general prohibitions because that would be putting at stake the freedom of speech and expression. So if we have to have something in mind, government can do something, perhaps not only government, even leading social media platforms, because they have the capability. Social media had ito yung nag-boomerang, yung masyadong sobrang freedom, the civic liberties of all that we have this time that pindot mo lang, pwedeng, you can cause havoc. Diba?
Right. We will continue this discussion later when we have a conversation about what we can do about fake news. But for now, hold those ideas. We'll be back for On the Record. You're watching On the Record on CNN Philippines. We probably should get back to what Marie was saying earlier, that the government acknowledges that fake news is a problem. But can I ask you, how exactly is the government affected by fake news?
Yes. For example, the one that happened in Marawi, the problem in Marawi. If news would come out, propaganda would come out that would incite violence. Halimbawa lang, sasabihin doon na pinapatay yung mga Muslim without any, categorically saying so na ito yung nangyari or the like. And mapapanood ng ibang tao, mga brothers and sisters natin, mga Muslim. And that would incite them to do violent acts to others, towards Christians perhaps. Yeah. That is just one of the examples. So with this one, and also that, the one that happened in Resorts World, if you incite people or you would create so much fear sa mga kababayan natin, someone has to be held responsible for that.
Right.
Because, you know, doing the normal thing that you do, you bring your children to school and the like, and you get disturbed, you don't go to the malls anymore, you're afraid to ride in the MRT and the like and everything. So it disrupts the normal things that every ordinary Filipino should be doing.
Yeah.
Diba? And sometimes also, like for instance, yung pagre-require ng identification card only for Muslims in some areas,
Yeah.
di ba? This one is discriminatory. And hindi ito ang gusto ng ating konstitusyon.
And you're saying that's fake news also. That's not true.
Well, they might have intended that to happen. But then, nung lumabas yon, it must not be something that came from the national government that should be implemented. It should not be couched in such terms as to be discriminating yung mga kababayan, ibang kababayan po natin.
But what about if the reverse happens? What if you find out that someone from government is the one peddling fake news? How do you discipline these people?
I think that should be up for Congress to legislate. Because as of this time, we don't have regulations on fake news. That's again, I go back to the fact that we also have to acknowledge that these are the price we have to pay for the civil liberties of freedom of communication. And there's just so much freedom in the Constitution also that sometimes it hurts.
But I think we should also discuss, and I'm very worried about this, about how politicians and government itself would often use the label fake news to discredit legitimate journalists. And we've heard CNN even being bashed by Trump as fake news. And so I think both journalists and the government have a lot to discuss about this. And I think that's a form of bullying and silencing. And I wonder what we need to do about that.
Apparently kasi not in the Philippines or maybe in other governments also, parang yung the description of fake news is something that's anti the politician or di ba parang if it's something negative about a politician, a government official, they automatically brand it as fake news because it's just too convenient to brand this as fake news. So parang all the more siguro, also on the part of our government, siguro all the more na challenge din to, you know, to make sure that it doesn't come from the government. I mean, you know, parang mawalang galang na lang po. But there were some instances na minsan din, some fake news or maybe inaccurate reports from the government, minsan nagiging scapegoat din po yung media na parang we misquoted or 'di ba minsan may ganun din po. So also that also matters to us na how to counter fake news and also coming from the side of the government. Maybe not fake news, more of siguro inaccurate news.
But is there a certain policy that the government has, let's say, media training for cabinet secretaries, how to deal with sensitive information? Do you give them advice? Do you have guidelines for your office when it comes to making sure that you're not perpetuating fake news also?
Yes. Well, the office is reaching out to cabinet secretaries to train them on how to craft the message. What exactly do you want the Juan and Juana on the streets to know? Ano ba exactly yung programa na gusto natin na ipaalam sa ating mga kababayan? And basically, yan siguro din because hindi naman lahat ng ating mga cabinet secretaries mga articulate sa pagsasabi kung anong mga programa nila, anong nararamdaman nila, ano ang opinion nila sa mga bagay-bagay na to. So we're training our cabinet.
You're training the cabinet secretary.
We're not training, we're helping them.
Capacity building.
Capacity building on how to craft the message.
Okay.
And to sometimes they get some, of course, not only cabinet secretaries, spokespersons also. So we're at our end, we do best to improve ourselves every day. But of course, not every day, hawak mo ang komposisyon ng utak mo para sabihin the right words at the right time, all the time. Nagkukulang din po kami.
Right. All right, we'll pause it there and we'll be back talking about fake news on the record. Welcome back. This is CNN Philippines On the Record, breaking fake news. Of course, we can't not talk about trolls when we are talking about fake news. And Jonathan, you were telling me earlier that in your research, one of the main findings is that this is really not new.
Yes. So I think we can trace fake news as nothing new. In a way, it continues from a long tradition of using black propaganda, smear campaigning, and different parties have been using it for a long time in their campaigns. So now, in online spaces, people are using trolls, bots, and fake news to distort information and the conversation. And these are masterminded by political campaign strategists. And I think we really need to have we need to dig deep and have a good engage conversation with them about the ethics of campaigning.
When President Duterte, for example, said na we employed trolls, of course we did. Parang the effect nga to me is, yeah, of course, that's how campaigns work. Do I agree with it? Not necessarily. Pero noon pa naman may black propaganda. Ruth?
Yeah, and even nung campaign, one of the online officers of the Duterte campaign admitted that because they lacked budget during that time, they had to make use of social media to also help in the campaign of then Mayor Duterte. So they were saying they employed like more than 400 people to go around and pass on messages and retweets and Facebook messages. But then again, siguro somewhere along the way, it evolved into a different kind of organism or whatever that we're calling trolls now. But not necessarily all of them are trolls, di ba? Parang may definition naman tayo ng kung ano talaga yung trolls, kung ano talaga yung legit supporters of the president na they conduct also naman na comprehensive and yung relevant discussion also.
Yeah, which brings us to the final topic of our conversation today, which is what can we do about this? So I think from the end of photographers, parang a lot of people are also discrediting photographers. Na Photoshop lang naman yan eh, di ba? So how can we make sure that the trust to photojournalists are back and we can fight fake news correctly?
Si Robert Capa during the World War I nagkaroon ng question dun sa kanyang iconic photo of a Spanish soldier, 'di ba? At tandaan natin yung unang gumamit o take advantage ng social media hindi naman gobyerno o kung sino. Tayo mismo sa mainstream media. Naalala nyo ba kung paano natin ito ginamit? Nagsimula tayo ng citizen journalism, umusbong yung gano'n na inaarmasan natin yung mamamayan kung paano sila maghatid ng balita. The same way, ganun yung nangyari. Inarmasan ng mga entities yung mamamayan din para maghatid ng ibang klaseng balita. So, depende lang kung saan ka nakatayo eh. For images, for photojournalists, yung Photojournalist Center of the Philippines at iba pang mga organisasyon ng mga mamamahayag at photographers, patuloy yan na nagbabantay sa hanay. No? We police our own ranks. Hindi man natin naririnig, pero matagal na.
But I think one of the biggest conversations now is, should we legislate this? And what are the official steps that the government should take, if it should take any steps at all, to work on fake news? So Marie, what's the take from the Presidential Communications Office?
Well, since, like I said a while ago, we don't regulate. What we would encourage is self-regulation and to raise the standard of accuracy in giving out news, especially from us, sa government. Now, we would respect Congress if they would deem it proper to regulate, for as long as it would not be a general prohibition or for them to control the content.
Right.
Because that's
censorship already.
That's censorship, and that's, of course, in violation of our very fundamental law. Now, if and when Senate or Congress decides to regulate, perhaps it would take all of us so that they know and understand what's the take of everyone insofar as fake news is concerned. From traditional media, from the academe, from civil society, from government.
Yeah.
So that they'd have a better and more comprehensive view on how to regulate and legislate. And of course, it's very important to also get the take from intermediaries, the big social media, the leading social media platforms, because how can you regulate them? Sometimes it's not only a matter of propaganda anymore, it's profit also, the algorithms and the like. So it's beyond us.
Right.
It's beyond whatever that we see. There's more than meets the eye.
Right. So the impression I'm getting is the priority is, of course, for the Duterte administration to protect free speech and enforce self-regulation among the citizens. That's the position now.
Yes.
Even dun sa regulation, no? Mahalaga yung education.
Self-regulation. Yes, that's
Education ng consumer, nung masa. Kasi kahit sino sa atin yung maglabas ng information through the internet, depende dun sa consumer kung paano niya ititreat yun eh.
Yeah. Delikado na siya.
I
Yeah.
would share that parang yung kailangan na sagot dito, parang cultural and structural. So while we can educate citizens, we should also be thinking about deceptive communication and how we got here in the first place. I think we've been tolerating white lies from brands, from celebrities, from gossip columnists, and I think we, in a way, were conditioned to accept fake news in its current form. So, na-prepare na tayo for this?
Sa amin po, sa Presidential Communications, other than self-regulation, it would take all of us, and of course, from government, if Congress cannot regulate us, at least they could do something sa end nila to help out na part ng curricula ng mga bata is to understand the responsibility of having to share something that would be deceptive of others. Because it starts from all of us. Do we understand what we read? All of us are stakeholders here. And tama yung sabi kanina na kahit nandyan yan, kung walang papansin, wala silang magagawa.
And finally, on the part of journalists, of course, NUJP is taking active steps to fight fake news. Final thoughts on this subject?
Actually, sa totoo lang, on the part of yung traditional media like us, nothing should really change. Kasi totoo naman na trabaho namin even before to confirm from sources, to report all sides of the story. Hindi nagbabago yung kung paano kami mag-gather ng information, to do our research, to vet the information that we get. So magpapatuloy yun, except that the challenge for us is yung social media has given us a lot of competitors, citizens who just share stories in one click na kami. We have to go through the whole process of vetting the story. So yun lang talaga yung challenge. But the traditional media will keep on doing what we've always been doing and making sure na accurate and truthful din yung information namin. Pero ngayon lang, we are taking steps. Yung simple na, yung nagbablock ng mga fake websites, I think NUJP has done that. Yung mga ganun, it helps a lot. But also, sana rin on the part of yung aming audience, mas maging makilates din sila dun sa mga fake news sites. Even the CPCP has identified certain fake news sites. So that will also help kasi mahirap din sabayan yung technology.
Well, I learned a lot. So to fight fake news, we need better, real news, and we need a cultural shift as well. We need to keep the conversation going, that's for sure. And on that note, thank you very much for joining us in this conversation at the Coffee Project. And thank you to our viewers for watching On the Record on CNN Philippines.